All right, so you're curious about becoming a public housing manager, huh? Well, get ready because we're about to take a deep dive, a real deep dive, into what this career is all about. And we're using those RoleCatcher excerpts you sent us.
Should be interesting.
It's way more than just, handing out keys and stuff.
Yeah, it's way more nuanced than people realize. It's really a field where, you're at the intersection of social impact and strategic thinking.
Yeah.
These are the people making decisions that affect how communities actually live. We're talking about navigating like housing policies, often limited resources, and the needs of a diverse population.
So you're saying it's about understanding people as much as you understand property management.
Absolutely. And one of the things that really stuck out to me from the RoleCatcher stuff was the emphasis on conflict resolution. Imagine like mediating a dispute between residents, maybe from different cultural backgrounds,
Right.
each with their own, understanding of like their rights and responsibilities as a tenant.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Oh, yeah.
So you're not just enforcing rules, you're really acting as a bridge between like different perspectives and
Exactly. It requires serious social perceptiveness,
yeah.
And speaking of different perspectives, RoleCatcher painted a pretty diverse picture of where public housing managers actually work, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. Fill us in. What'd they say?
Well, it's not just a government job anymore, right? We're seeing nonprofits and even private companies taking on a bigger role in kind of this whole affordable housing ecosystem.
So like your typical day could look really different depending on who's, signing your paycheck, essentially. But whether you're working for like a government agency or a private firm, the challenges I imagine can be pretty similar.
Oh, absolutely. And RoleCatcher doesn't sugarcoat that at all. I mean, limited resources are a constant hurdle, which means public housing managers have to be masters of, resourcefulness and creative problem solving. They really have to think outside the box.
Right, because if you're constantly dealing with like budget constraints and you're trying to meet these like really essential needs in the community, that's got to create some tough choices, some ethical dilemmas even.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And all of that's happening while you're trying to stay up to date on housing policies that are constantly evolving.
Right? Things like Section 8 vouchers. Just explaining that to somebody who's never, encountered that system, that can be complex.
Absolutely. And for those who don't know, Section 8 vouchers are government funded and they help low-income individuals and families afford decent, safe rental housing in the private market.
It's a whole other layer of, rules and regulations on top of traditional public housing developments.
Yeah.
And then you've got, of course, HUD funding, that's always changing.
Always in flux.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you need to be a quick study, adaptable. You've got to be thinking a few steps ahead to anticipate any challenges that might come up.
Okay, so we've painted the picture. It's not a walk in the park. It's a challenging field. But what about the rewards? What does RoleCatcher highlight as being like the most fulfilling part of this career?
The common thread is definitely the impact. You're not just like crunching numbers all day. You're creating real change in people's lives. Imagine like seeing a family finally move into a safe and stable home after years of struggling. You were part of that.
Yeah,
That's powerful.
that's got to be incredibly rewarding to see that firsthand. And it sounds like because you have such a range of places you could work, you can really find a niche that aligns with like your values. Like, let's say you're really passionate about sustainability and environmentalism.
And that's a great example because that's become so important in this field, right? I mean, one of the big takeaways from RoleCatcher was that, as older public housing stock ages, we have to think about sustainability. And we're not just talking about, being eco-friendly. It's also about managing costs, renovations, meeting those standards.
So you could be on the cutting edge of the green building practices, but you're also grappling with the realities of, limited budgets and trying to make those two things work together.
It's that tension again. That's why it's so fascinating. And I think as we, dig deeper into the skills and qualifications, you'll see that you need this unique blend of analytical thinking, but also genuine compassion. You have to understand the complex policies, but you also have to connect with people, on a human level. It's a balance.
Okay, so let's dig into those skills. What I found interesting is RoleCatcher doesn't just list out, get this degree, get that degree. It's this really interesting mix of hard skills and soft skills that you need to be successful in this kind of job.
And it makes sense when you think about what we were just talking about with the conflict resolution and really having to be emotionally intelligent, right? Like you're using active listening skills,
Yeah.
things you can't really, just learn from a textbook.
So it's like that classic people person, but who also loves a good spreadsheet. those don't always go together.
Right, exactly. But in this case, they really do. Because you could be deep in the weeds of like analyzing data 1 minute and then the next you're, leading a community meeting.
And it's all connected, right?
Yeah.
Because it's about understanding how these policies, these numbers, actually impact real people.
100%.
Speaking of, learning RoleCatcher, did mention some degrees that they felt were relevant. And it wasn't always like the most obvious ones, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and there were some that you'd expect, right? Like urban planning or public administration. But even things like social work or even a law degree could be surprisingly relevant.
Because you're thinking about systems, right?
Exactly. So it's about navigating those social systems as much as it is about managing the actual properties themselves.
Which I think is a good segue into talking about, like, the actual career ladder.
Okay.
We've talked about the top spot, that public housing manager role, but
Yeah.
how do you even get your foot in the door? What are those entry-level positions that RoleCatcher was highlighting?
Yeah, so they actually had a really nice, trajectory laid out. You might start as a public housing assistant.
Okay.
And that could look like, doing a lot of the research, coordinating with different organizations.
So getting to know the landscape?
Exactly. Building those relationships.
It's almost like an apprenticeship or like community building in a way, right?
100%. Then you move into maybe a coordinator role where you might be managing budgets for specific projects, maybe developing community outreach programs, things like that. So you're getting more and more autonomy as you move up that ladder.
So let's say you've put in the work, you've got that experience. Now you're applying for that, coveted public housing manager position. What are some things that RoleCatcher said could help you stand out, from the other candidates who are all vying for that same job?
Certifications are huge. They really emphasize that. So things like, becoming a certified housing manager, which is something offered through the National Affordable Housing Management Association. That's a big one, CHM, they call it.
Fitchy.
Or, a certified property manager, the CPM, that's offered by the Institute of Real Estate Management. But those carry a lot of weight, those certifications.
Like, someone's looking at your resume and it's that little, gold star that says, okay, this person's legit.
Right, like a stamp of approval. They've got the knowledge, the skills to handle all the complexities of this job.
Now, I know one thing that's probably on a lot of listeners' minds, because it's always on my mind, is salary.
Of course, yeah.
And RoleCatcher was a little bit vague on the specifics. I don't know if that's just because it varies so widely or...
I think that's a big part of it. It really depends on location, experience, the type of organization you're working for.
Right.
But they did emphasize the job security and the benefits that often come with, public sector work.
So while the salary might not be as, sky high as some private sector gigs, there's a certain, peace of mind that comes with knowing, okay, I've got good benefits.
Yeah.
Things are a little bit more stable, a little bit more predictable, maybe.
Absolutely. And I think for a lot of people drawn to this field, it's not just about, the paycheck. It's the total package, right?
Yeah.
It's the benefits. It's the job security. It's also that sense of purpose you get knowing that you're making a real difference.
Definitely. And speaking of making a difference, one thing that I thought was really important that RoleCatcher did touch on is that, public housing has faced some criticism over the years, right? Some negative stereotypes.
100%. It's kind of the elephant in the room.
It is.
Yeah.
So how do you, as a public housing manager, kind of push back against that? Because it's one thing to be managing properties, but it's another to be advocating for residents who might be facing those stereotypes.
It's a great question. And honestly, I thought RoleCatcher handled this really well. They don't shy away from it. They really encourage aspiring public housing managers to be prepared to address these perceptions head on.
And how do you do that?
I think a lot of it comes down to transparency.
Okay.
Opening up those lines of communication with the broader community, showcasing the success stories, making sure that residents are involved in those decision-making processes. All of that can help break down those barriers.
It's about putting a human face on it, because
Right.
ultimately we're talking about people's homes, people's lives, not just, buildings and budgets.
Precisely, and that's where those strong communication skills come into play again, right?
Big time.
Because whether you're writing a compelling grant proposal, whether you're, presenting at a community meeting, or just listening to a resident's concerns with empathy, that ability to connect on a human level is so, so crucial.
It sounds like this job. It really is. Like you're wearing multiple hats. You're an analyst. You're an advocate. You're almost like a counselor in some ways.
It's true. I think that's what makes it so challenging, but also incredibly rewarding. Because you're constantly learning, you're growing, you're finding new ways to, make a tangible impact in your community.
So we've really dug into the ins and outs of what a public housing manager does,
Mm.
the skills you need, those tough stereotypes, even talked about salary. It's a lot.
It is, and I think it's clear that this isn't, your typical 9 to
It's
5.
probably not.
It's a career that demands a lot, but it offers a level of impact that's, really hard to find in other fields. And I think
For the right person, it's got to be incredibly rewarding.
absolutely.
So as you continue your research, maybe you're picturing yourself in this role. There's one question that RoleCatcher kind of hinted at that really stuck with me.
Oh, okay. I'm intrigued. What's the question?
Think about the affordable housing crisis, but where you live, in your city, your region. What are some of the things that people are trying? Are there new models of development, new
Yeah.
organizations doing things differently? Because this isn't just about managing what exists, right?
Right.
It's about advocating for change and new solutions.
That's such a good point because, the need for affordable housing isn't going anywhere. And it's going to take these creative, passionate individuals to find solutions and be advocates for, the people who need it most.
And that could be you. Maybe you're going to be the one who comes up with that next big idea that changes how we approach this whole thing. Or maybe you're going to be on the ground, implementing those ideas, working with residents.
Exactly.
It's all important.
It's about being part of something bigger than yourself, right?
Yeah.
Contributing to a more just and equitable world where everyone has a safe and affordable place to live.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So on that note, we'll let you continue your deep dive into the world of public housing management. All those resources we talked about, NAHRO, the industry publications, all that stuff, they're out there. They can support you.
Absolutely. Keep asking those questions. Never stop learning. And I think, most importantly, don't lose sight of the human impact of this work.
Yeah. It's been awesome diving deep with you. Until next time, everybody, keep exploring, keep learning, keep seeking out those impactful careers that make the world a better place.
Absolutely.